In this series, I will be reviewing hands that I played that I thought were interesting and that I wanted to share with you guys. So expect donkey, fancy plays, hero calls, big bluffs, and everything in between. Let's get into the first hand where we play a 3-bet pot in position versus a recreational player with 7-6 suited. We see a flop of king jack 8 and we decide to go for a cbet of half pot. Straight away, actually, I find this quite interesting. I think king jack 8 two-tone and versus recreationals in general, I think there's quite a lot of opportunities here to use a very exploitive strategy where we want to be betting our bluffs for a small sizing and our value hands for a big sizing. Now, why is that? I think king jack 8 two-tone is a board that Vinny is going to respond quite inelastic on. So that means that regardless of the bet size, he's going to continue a reasonably similar frequency, okay? And how can we exploit that? Well, by betting our value big and our bluffs small, because if you think about it, if he has like 2 undercards or a low pair or like some random ace high that has nothing, he's generally going to fold, whereas if he has queen 10, he's never folding. If he has 9-10, he's never folding. I guess the only hands that would be sort of elastic, I guess, are maybe like something like 8-6 suited. Maybe he will decide to fold that if we go too big. A hand like ace 5 of hearts, I guess, would be a bit elastic. But I think half pot here kind of misses the point. I think I would have liked to see myself betting 1/3 and then with your value bet very big. Well, Wakko, that's very exploitative. Yes, I know, that is very exploitative. We're playing versus a recreational player who's not thinking about our strategies, only looking at his hand. And because he's only looking at his hand, that offers us opportunities to exploit him. But we see at half pot, Villain calls, and the turn is a deuce of hearts, and he checks towards us. Now, this is a very interesting spot in terms of how do we want to construct our betting range, mainly in terms of do we want to be barreling equity hands or non-equity holdings. The thing with 3-bet pots in position, lower SPR, and also versus recreational players on boards that are double flush draw. This is a general tendency of population that you will see. On double flush draw boards, raise percentages on turns are usually the highest. Now, when a board becomes wet like this and an SPR becomes low, getting raised is a real threat and we have to adjust our range construction accordingly. So anytime we have a hand that when it bets and it faces a raise, it has to puke because it has to fold, meaning that, you know, you have a decent amount of equity, like the draw that we have here. You usually don't really want to be betting that hand. So I thought in game, a hand like 6-7 of spades would definitely be a check. And I thought 6-7 of hearts would probably also be a check. I think this is a spot where we want to be barreling very aggressively with hands like 6-7 of clubs or 6-7 of diamonds. Okay, now people are thinking, hey, Wakko, I would prefer to have 6-7 of hearts, right? Because it has more equity. And yes, it's true. Obviously, it has a higher EV in betting than, for example, 6-7 of diamonds. But if you think this way, you're missing the point because the EV of checking with 6-7 of hearts is obviously also way higher than the EV of checking with 6-7 of diamonds because 6-7 of diamond, the EV of checking is quite low because you have nothing, okay? And the EV of your play has to outperform the other alternative within that same hand category. So 6-7 of diamond has to compare the EV of betting 6-7 of diamonds compared to the EV of checking 6-7 of diamonds, okay? And then I would say 6-7 of diamonds usually wants to bet, and the plan then is to triple off. In general, versus recreational players, they overcall draws on 2 streets. So let's say he has a hand like 9-10 off, queen 10 off, ace 10 off, ace queen, any flush draw. He's probably going to be overcalling them on the turn, and therefore what you will see is that recreationals when they're out of position, they fold a lot to triple barrels. And this is one contributor. The other contributor is the fact that they will sometimes lead strong hands, okay? When, for example, draws come in, they tend to lead when they have made their draw, all right? So I actually did go for the barrel. I'm not a huge fan of this. Like I said, I would have preferred a check for reasons that I just explained. Villain does go ahead and make the call. Now, my plan was already with 6-7 of hearts that I was going to triple off. Let's say you have something like 9x of hearts or 9x of spades or 10x of spades, 10x of hearts. These are hands that you definitely want to be checking because then you're also blocking like some of the potential folding range. Let's say it's queen 9 off, like some gutters, 10-7 suited or something like that. So that's another thing to take in consideration. At some point, your draw becomes this good. Let's say you have 9-10 of hearts, 9-10 of spades, or queen 10 of hearts, queen 10 of spades. They are so good that you can just bet, and if he raises, you just call it off, okay? So that's kind of the flipping point. So be careful with the medium draws, I'd say. Now, river is a three of spades. My plan here was to triple off when he checks because, like I said, I think he has a lot of auto faults in his range. Queen 10, ace 10, ace queen, 9, 10. However, he decides to dunk. Now, I just talked about why triple barreling in position for the recreational is good. It's because, you know, they have these auto faults and they lead out when they have a strong hand. Now, that's one piece of information. Another tell usually on recreational is that they're very transparent with their bet sizing, usually meaning that smaller bets are weaker and bigger bets are stronger. So this got me wondering. It's like, okay, on one side he's saying that he has a flush, but on the other side, the sizing doesn't tell me that he has a flush. So I was a little bit in doubt here in terms of what to do. And now people are watching, well, what do you mean, WAKko? You have 7 high. You cannot call. Indeed, we cannot call, but we can actually go for the raise. Now, what I like about this raise, I thought there was a very fair chance that Villain was very bluff heavy here with this sizing. Okay, we already named it Queen 10, 9, 10. He also thought about it for a little while, so it could be that he was just drawing, and then on the spade, he was like, maybe I should lead here. And then usually what you will see, if they do have the flush, they probably act a little bit faster, and they do tend to just ship their stack in. So with this read, I gave his range way more bluffs. And if you think about it, we're only risking $756 to win a pot of 1891, or at least that's the total pot. The pot before I made the raises 1.1k, meaning that this only has to work somewhere along 35 to 40% of the time or so. So, you know, in game, I went with my read. To my surprise, he didn't fold or call straight away, which I kind of expected. He started tanking, and I was like, oh my God, it's, you know, it's this like, listen, I have $331 behind, I have ace queen, let's just chip the final money in. After a little bit of debating, he did finally decide to fold. Let me know what you guys think about this hand. Okay, is this good poker or am I losing my mind? You tell me in the comments down below. Next hand, we're opening up Jack 10 of diamonds. Get a call from the big blind. We see a flop of 4-7-5 two-tone, and we started with a check. In general, when the board is low connected, these usually favor the big blind. My default strategy on low boards is going to be that I'll be range checking. Now, when the board is like 7-5 deuce rainbow, for example, we will definitely be allowed some betting. Then kind of what I think about, okay, my default is range check, but do I have something better going on with my hand? So let's say 7-5 deuce and I have 10 jack. Might be a good candidate to actually throw in a bet, or let's say we have pocket nines. It's going to be a low betting frequency, which is going to be very much driven around, let's say 7-5 deuce, 8s, 9s, 10s, and then like 8, 9, 9, 10, these type of hands. So, but this board is just too wet, too connected. There's, I don't think, any much more that I can do than range check. Villain now steps half pot. Now, to be fair, this is probably where the hand should be over. I think Jack 10. Let's say we had 9-10 with a diamond. I think we can probably continue. I think half pot for Jack 10 with a diamond is a little bit too expensive. I actually did decide to call. I think raising is also an option. He's going to be stabbing here 50, 60% of the time. I'd imagine, right? These boards, they are getting stabbed very aggressively. 9-10 at least, you know, has a bit more draws that it makes on a turn. I would not be peeling Queen 10 or King Queen, King Jack, etc. But I do have a draw in the future. If you're an optimistic poker player like me, you know, if an 8 rolls off and a 9 rolls off, very high chance we get a stack, okay? Because he will have a straight and he will not see the Jack 10 coming. Okay, so a little bit of deception here. I also saw good things happening. Like I could lead on a king and ace. Maybe we could even lead on an 8. I don't know if that's a thing, but hey, I was planning some funky stuff. The 10 is probably the easiest turn to play, unless he now goes direction all in and jams the river. However, Villain bets 3/4. Now this is the first interesting point in the hand from his range perspective. This is a spot where if you would look up people's strategies, you will see a range of strategies being used, anywhere between half pot, 3/4 pot, overbet. And usually, just as an overall read for population, in spots where multiple sizings are being used, obviously we don't have a read on this specific opponent, but just general population tendencies, bigger sizings tend to be constructed a bit stronger, meaning more value hands and stronger draws. and the smaller sizings tend to be a little bit more weaker draws, complete air balls, and lacks like real nutted hands. So these bets are going to be more designed for like a 7 or pocket 8s or something along those lines. Because then this sizing rules out because they look too much at their hand and they think what their hand wants to do instead of what their range wants to do. Now, I'm not projecting this completely on my opponents and soul reading him now on a weaker holding, but it's definitely something that I will take in consideration, that a bigger sizing could have been used. So a piece of information that's definitely on the river going to help me make a better decision. All right. Now, another thing that is interesting when smaller sizings are being used by in position in this spot, and also the fact that the river is a 9, which completes some of his bluffs. Let's say he had Jack 9 or 8 9, or like a random Queen 9, King 9. I think, you know, this is very easy spot for villain to be out of line on the flop and out of line on the turn. As a 10 doesn't really improve my range. Well, little does he know I have the Jack 10. Something that then actually will happen in strategy is that we will actually lead. And I throw out a little, I was a bit in doubt. Should have bet 10%, should have bet 25%. And usually when I'm in doubt between two sizings, guys, I end up somewhere in the middle. So that's what I did. Decided to go for a little lead. This lead is designed to not have him check back a 7 or a 9. Okay, which I think he's going to have quite a lot. So yeah, I actually really like this lead. He, however, was like, hey, Wakko, I don't know what you're doing with this little lead, but no donkeys allowed here. I just ripped my stack in. So this is like a pretty big raise, probably like 2.5x the pot. And now it's up to us to range him. And basically the consideration that we have to make, I mean, you can look at this in two ways. You can look at it more from a defensive perspective, like, oh, okay, I have to defend an X percentage of the time, which hand is good, and I just call. Or we can look at it a bit more offensive, trying to think, okay, is my opponent over-bluffing and under-bluffing, and then folding or calling range accordingly, okay? So there is two things going on here, both from a defensive perspective. I think our hand actually makes for quite a good bluff catcher. We block the Jack 8, which is the hand that I think is going to play like this basically 100% of the time. We block a hand like 9-10 that I think he could play like this 100% of the time. Obviously, we don't block 6-8 or something. He could have a set, very likely as well. So sets, some good two pairs like 9-10. I don't know if he would always jam a hand like 5-4, for example. But this is also where the turn sizing comes in. And like I said, I'm not going to give too big of a weight on this read. But I thought there was a chance that if he had 6-8 or like a good draw like Jack 8, that there was a chance that he might size bigger on the turn. So we have a pretty decent bluff catcher. What are his bluffs? Like I said, I think just checking towards him on flop and the fact that the 10 rolled off on the turn, I think he's very inclined to do a lot of bluffing, even with very unnatural hands. But even the natural hands, if we think about potential candidates, Ace 8, King 8, Queen 8. If he would bluff only a small proportion of those, he's probably already going to be massively over bluffing, right? Then we have the King 6, the Ace 6, and maybe even like some complete air balls. Like, I guess complete air balls now is going to be hard. Maybe a hand like King Jack or something like that if he's very aggressive. So I figured our perceived range, I think, is quite capped and weak, right? He could have a lot of potential bluffs, so I think it's very easy for him to overbluff. He has the candidates, and I think the line that we took, if you're a more action-oriented player, you're like, hey, you're capped. I'm not capped. I have all these nuts that you don't have. I'm all in. So I figured his thought process could be somewhere along those lines. So I chip in the Jack 10, both because I think it's just a good hand to call with, and both because I thought it was likely that our opponent could be over bluffing here. And he showed up with Jack 2 suited, which, you know, very out of line. But this is exactly like one of these combinations that I talked about. Like we had like the normal, quote, quote, normal combinations, and then we have just a bunch of like random stuff like Jack 2 suited in there. Okay. So, yeah, I actually really like the way I played this hand. In this next hand, we're playing a 3-pot out of position with Ace Queen suited versus the button. Flop comes King Jack Deuce. think easy range bet. You have a very big range advantage, small bet versus button in a 3-bet pot on any board that contains 2 high cards. So that's what I'll do. Villain calls, and the turn is, I guess, the first sort of interesting point in the hand. I don't think we're very interested in betting a lot of like medium strength hand, like a jack or pocket tens, because we bet at range on the flop. He had to do a lot of folding. So just by calling, I think the equities are at least close. So I think what we'll roll out is a lower frequency with a bigger sizing. Weakest hand that we can probably bet, maybe like king 9 or something along those lines. Maybe some pocket queens, but that's about it. Ace queen, particularly in terms of if we talk about bluffs, I actually really like ace queen. So I decided to go for a bet. We put a lot of pressure on hands like 3s to 10s straight away. And the good thing with ace queen is that we actually get called by worse hands. If you think about flush draws or queen 10 suited or maybe ace 10 suited, these are hands that he could call with. So it's quite mergy on the turn. Get better hands to fold, get worse hands to call. So I think the turn bet is definitely the best play. Villain makes the call and the river is 3. Now, obviously, we mentioned already on the turn, and this is something that actually I was already quite focused on the turn, is the fact that we are merging a bit on the turn, and he's actually going to call us with quite a lot of weaker hands. So I kind of hooked myself already on that thought on the turn. I was like, wow, actually, if the river is a blank, we might actually have a good check call. Now, the river is a 3, so that means that some of our bluffs that we had on the turn would have improved. So let's say we had ace 4 suited or ace 3 suited, we would have now improved. That means that we can bluff probably a little bit more. So ace queen now on a 3, I could actually consider bluffing, whereas let's say the river is a 6, I think we should just always check. But I decided to go for a check, and now villain jams. And if we think about it, like, what is villain's value range? This is usually the first thing you want to think about in these kind of situations, because if you start counting and you cannot really think of a lot of combos, usually it's quite easy to be over bluffing. So I usually like to think about the value hands first and then think about the bluffs. So if we think about his value range, what is the bottom hand that he's jamming? Maybe something like king 9 suited, king 10 suited. I don't think he can jam a hand like king 8 suited or even king 9 suited. Let's say I had a hand like king jack. I would probably always play this way, bet, check, call. Let's say I had king 9. I would probably play this way myself. So I think his bottom is probably king 10 suited, maybe king 9 suited. So that is 6 combos. Let's say he has some king jack. King jack actually could raise turn some of the time. Same for king queen. So king jack is already reduced due to the fact there's a king and the jack on the board. King queen is reduced because we have a queen in our hand. So let's say that gives him another 16 combos or 21 combos. He has some pocket 5s with a club. So that's 23. Maybe he has some deuces, 24. Let's say ace 4 of clubs is a straight, right? Yeah, ace 4 of clubs is straight. So let's say he has 25 combos. We need 31% to be right. So we need roughly 10 bluff combos. Then if we think about the bluffs, queen 10 obviously is the auto bluff, right? He has the lower flush draws, which are auto bluffs. And then he has like some ace highs. Let's say he has ace 10. Is he going to bluff those? Not really sure. If he is going to bluff, I think he will be probably over bluffing. So I kind of thought it was close, but figured it was still worth the call. So I chipped in another 660 bucks and tried my luck. Hope he had a missed draw, but unfortunately he had king queen. Let me know what you guys think about this call. I think the downside of this call is that if we think about combo-wise, all the combos that he could have, that he could bluff with, I think then we might indeed reach 31%. So you could say, okay, well, he has all these bluffs, so we should call. But I think it's a spot where it's easier for him to underbluff than it is to overbluff. Because if he checks behind some ace-high flush draws, for example, on the river, he's probably underbluffing. And there's no scenario where if he bluffs all his bluffs, he's significantly overbluffing. So this is actually something that you have to take into consideration when making hero calls. If the best case scenario is that he's indeed bluffing 31%, and that's literally him bluffing all his bluffs, probably it's not going to be a profitable call in the long term. And another interesting hand here with queen 8 suited. I mean, all hands are going to be interesting. That's why I filtered these hands, right? So we overcall. Villain in the small blind is a recreational player. It's important to note. We see a flop of 9-6-8. Villain checks, and we decide to go out for a little donkey here. if we think about what drives bet frequencies, that's usually having a certain advantage. Now, if we think about like another advantage that we have here on this board, if we think about 6-8 suited, 6-9 suited, 9-8 offsuit, okay, these are all hands that I have in my range that the under the gun opener probably doesn't have in his range. The deeper you get, nut advantage also becomes important. So how much nut advantage do we have both now and in the future? The future aspect here, getting deeper, is very important. If we think about Jack 10 off, Queen 10 off, these are hands that we're going to have in his range, in our range, that Villain probably doesn't have. So I feel like also in the future, we're going to make a lot of straights. Like there's going to be a lot of equity improving cards for us, which is going to put Villain 21 here, under the gun, regular, in quite a nasty spot. So I figured it would be a good spot to start investing in the pot. Villain calls, and the recreational actually comes along. If we want to talk a little bit about how to construct this range, I think I made a video before. I think I also gave a video at GTO Wizard. I think it was a free video. You can go check that out there on the YouTube channel about donking. How to balance this donking range. Honestly, it's not that important in a three-way pot, because let's say I have a very unbalanced checking range. I'm not saying that I have, but let's say my checks are always weak. Under the gun still has the recreational to think of, so it's not like he gets a green light. Second point is, let's say I check towards him, Villain then has to know that I have a donking range, so therefore my checking range actually looks different than if I would check all my hands, so that's what he has to know. And then he has to know that if it's my checking range that's weaker or my donking range that's weaker, he needs to then know how I constructed range in order to play correctly, aka it's going to be very hard for him to play correctly. To be fair, I maybe do not even exactly know how my range looks like in this spot. I have certain heuristics that I use to kind of balance things out. But, you know, you got to allow yourself to be creative in game. And I figured this hand made for a good donkey for all the reasons that I just discussed. The turn is where things become interesting. Obviously, if the turn was a 7, a 10, a jack, obviously a queen, we make 2 pair, or an 8, we make trips. But those were actually initially the cards that I was looking for, because like I said, I think they're very much improving for my range. This guy here, he only check called. I think if he had a 9, there was a chance that he could lead himself, right? Something that recreationals like to do. He could maybe check raise versus a small bet and a call if he had like ace 9, king 9. So I think we have him beat quite a high percentage of the time. If we check here, I think we allow him to play pretty perfectly. We allow 2 people to realize our equity. So what I actually decided to do is I decided to go for an overbet and basically merge my hand. Now, what does it mean? For people who are like, okay, what does it mean to merge your hand? I think what this bet is going to accomplish, I put a lot of pressure both now and in the future, right? We have quite a lot of money behind, and there's going to be some equity switching rivers. Think about a 7, think about a 10, think about a jack. These are very good cards for my perceived range. Not for my actual hand, but for my range, they're actually quite good cards. And I can apply a lot of pressure if these cards were off. So the under-the-gun player is not only concerned about my range now, which, like I said, I could easily have a set. I could have 2 pairs. I could have already had the straight, right? 5-7 suited, 10-7 suited in my range, which are not in his. So I think there's a fair chance that if he has an overpair, let's say specifically jacks or queens, which block a lot of my bluffs, that he might even already lean towards folding. Okay, same if he had a hand like jack 9 suited. I think he's probably folding straight away. Queen 9 suited is probably folding straight away. But if he has a hand like 6x of hearts, 8-7 suited, 6-7 suited, pocket 7s, I think there's actually a good chance that he's calling. Or let's say 10-8 suited. Same for the recreational. He could even have 8-7 offsuit. He could have 6-5 offsuit. He could have 6-7 offsuit. So I like this play. I think it allows me high EV on certain rivers, which if I check, they kind of disappear. Yeah, overall, just a lot of good things going on with my hand here. Recreational calls, the regular recreational folds, regular calls. River is the heart. Now, I don't think we really want to be doing something here with queen and the diamonds. If we want to be bluffing here on the river, we're probably going to be using our 10 jack with a heart or queen 10 with a heart as main bluffs. And I think queen 8, you know, we have some showdown value, but I think we should just start off with a check and reevaluate. Villain checks behind, and our plan worked out perfectly because he showed up 6-7 of clubs. Now, obviously, you know, this is running good in terms of the majority of the time. I think when it goes check, check, he's just going to show me like maybe I had like ace 9 or 9-10 or an overpair and we're just going to lose. But some percentage of the time this is going to happen. I think this boosts a lot of the EV of the turn bet. Like I said, on top of the fact that, let's say he does have pocket kings and the river is a 10, a 7 or a queen, we can definitely bluff him off a hand like that. Okay, so let me know what you guys thought about this hand and about all the hands in general. Some of the most interesting hands that I played. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. Okay, subscribe to the channel, notifications on, all that good stuff. Also, go check out this video here next, because if you like this one, I'm pretty sure you will like that one as well. See you in that video.